You are listening to the Marc Guzman Podcast Experience. To help out the wine industry or anything else that is catching your attention, how easy or how difficult is it to introduce a bill?
Oh, anybody can introduce a bill. You just have to take your subject matter to the Legislative Council, ask them to write the bill for you, sign your name, and drop it in the hopper.
That's easy.
Yeah. The trick is getting it out of the Congress onto the president's desk for signature.
Yeah, and getting that support behind it, right?
Correct.
So how many bills have you introduced yourself or sponsored over your career?
A couple hundred.
Couple hundred. Wow. Yeah. That's a lot.
I have a wall in my office that I have every bill that I've ever had signed into law on that wall. And it covers,
that's very cool.
Covers a pretty good part of the office, and I've had some pretty good bills signed into law. I'm pretty proud of that.
What's your ratio of completion, actually signed into law, compared to?
Oh, I don't know. A lot of times you write a bill, and that bill doesn't get passed, but it gets the material in the bill gets added to something else. So I don't know how you could factor that out.
Yeah,
I just know that the bill, and then too, if you co-sponsor a bill with someone, just because that person doesn't do what's necessary to get their bill passed, that shouldn't count against the co-authors.
Yeah. Now you announced recently that you're going to co-sponsor, correct? A regulation
on what?
This is let's see. I think it's on your website here. Regarding term limits on using military force in the Middle East.
Oh yeah. The authorization for the use of military force is something that is, I think, an important issue. The idea that we are still operating under the same authorization that we passed in 2001 after 9/11. Things have changed. I don't think we should be operating on the same authorization. We ought to reevaluate where we're going, reevaluate what we're doing, and reevaluate how we get out of what we're doing.
So right now, the president is able to basically use force as needed without any consultation with Congress?
Any place in the world where the president sees a nexus to the measure that was passed in 2001.
Okay.
And I think that's given a little bit too much power.
Yeah.
I think Congress needs to be involved in the debate on what we do militarily. And right now, I think it's written loosely enough where Congress can be excluded.
Well, I believe before 2001, and correct me if I'm wrong, if the president wanted to use military force, he would always have to go back to Congress to...
Well, yes and no. There's a period. A president can still use military force and come back to Congress for approval, because if there was an emergency, that it would be able to deal with that. But this is a little bit different situation. This was an authorization that was passed and has been the sole authorization for all of this time. And I think 17 years is enough.
Mm-hmm. So what's the political process at D.C. in trying to build up support? What are some things that you look for when you're introducing a bill?
Well, I think it depends upon the bill. I'll give you an example. A bill that I introduced fairly recently was a bill to give the Veterans Administration the authorization to take over the military cemetery on Mare Island. And there's an historic cemetery there. There's folks buried there going back to the War of 1812. There's very important, highly visible military folks buried there. There's 3 members of the military who were the recipients of the Congressional Medal of Honor are buried there. Francis Scott Key's daughter and grandchildren are buried there. And when they closed Mare Island, they transferred ownership of the island to the city of Vallejo, cemetery included. Well, the city doesn't have the financial resources to maintain it, and they've got some structural problems, and there's been some water damage, and the cemetery is an absolute mess. And there's no way in the world Vallejo could sell Vallejo and still couldn't come up with the money to maintain this. So I introduced legislation to transfer ownership of that cemetery to the VA. They have a department within the VA to maintain these sites. And what I'm doing is all the things that you would imagine. You get the American Legion, you get the VFW, you get all the different military groups to sign on and to support the bill, and you try and look for any support any way you can get it. Now, Senator Feinstein introduced my bill in the Senate, so we have a House bill and a Senate bill, and my staff has gone through, researched all the records to find out where these Congressional Medal of Honor winners are from. My idea was find out whose congressional district they're native of and go to my colleagues in the House and say, hey, you've got a Congressional Medal of Honor winner buried in a cemetery in my district, and the cemetery is a mess. Can you sign on to this bill to help me? Well, sadly, their records aren't going back that far, aren't what they are today. So all we've been able to find was the states that they're from. So shift gears, and instead of finding members of the House to co-author, now it's take the fight to members of the Senate. And there was one of them we don't know where he's from. We know that he was born, I believe, in Scotland, and then came over here and was in the military. And the only record they have on him is that he is buried, got the Medal of Honor and is buried there. Other two, one from New Jersey, one from Massachusetts. So we are going to the U.S. senators from those states saying, hey, sign up on Senator Feinstein's bill because you have a favorite son who won the Congressional Medal of Honor, and his burial site is very disrespectful to him and to the Congressional Medal of Honor. So you just try and figure out ways to get different people to sign up, make your pitch.
Thank you for listening to this podcast short. For more podcast content, be sure to subscribe to all of our podcast channels on YouTube, iTunes, iHeartRadio, Spotify, Libsyn, Castbox, Podbean, and literally anywhere else you listen to podcasts.